made very many enemies in his handling of the crisis. So the reaction has been, anything from, this is something that he presumably thought was coming. People obviously wishing him well. But yes, the fact is, it's from the very beginning, he has downplayed this virus. He has said that he would probably not really suffer very many symptoms. He has been quite dismissive of the death toll as it continued to rise. And now, of course, he has the virus himself. So the irony has not been missed among the Brazilian public today here. Well, he says that he has cancelled engagements. He will be doing video conferences from the palace in Brasilia for now. He's still got that cavalier attitude, I guess, and I think that's something that he will continue to have. He wants the economy back up and running. We've seen here in Sao Paulo and in Rio last week, shops beginning to open, bars and restaurants, and that push to return to normality. But of course, with the death toll rising, with the cases every day being so huge, well, the sense of normality is not quite there yet here in Brazil.
The BBC's Katie Watson there. To Melbourne now, where business owners are nervous as the city braces for another period of strict lockdown measures. The Victorian government has announced a 6-week lockdown of metropolitan Melbourne, which affects more than 5 million people. Some businesses are only just recovering from the first shutdown and don't know if they'll survive a second one. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
Tanya Hanush was planning to launch a new menu at a recently reopened southeast Melbourne wine bar today. So she was floored when she heard about the renewed lockdown.
I'm feeling a little bit empty at the moment. I think, like many of us in this industry, we innovated as much as we could at the start.
Having already switched from dine-in to solely pick-up and delivery when the pandemic first hit, she's unsure a second round of lockdowns.
I know I've got, let's call it innovation fatigue, so I'm feeling a little bit exhausted and deflated.
And how's the team there feeling, and are you pretty confident you'll be able to keep them on during this time?
I'll keep the core staff on. Yeah, my staff is like my family, and even if we just reduce some of their hours by a little bit, but they're still working with us, and that's going to be the main thing for us.
Bree Miller runs a beauty salon in Narre South, in the outer southeast of Melbourne. It's been open for barely a month after emerging from the earlier 9-week shutdown, and these new restrictions have caught her off guard.
It's scary. It's nerve-wracking to think, if this is a prolonged thing, like that is make or break for a small business.
Bree Miller will be relying on the JobKeeper wage subsidy to keep her staff on the books. But her immediate focus is accommodating some last-minute clients before the shutdown takes effect at midnight.
So getting as many clients in for treatments that they really need rather than just want, getting them in for the next 24 hours.
The stay-at-home orders apply to all of metropolitan Melbourne, along with the Mitchell Shire on the city's northern fringe. In one of the Shire's bigger towns, Seymour, Stuart Locke was last night one of many locals doing some grocery shopping before the lockdown begins.
There are 2 queues, half the length of the supermarket long. So the mood here is, it's sort of like a mild anxiousness about what will happen, because I've never seen this many people this time of the day in this particular supermarket.
Back in the Melbourne wine bar, Tanya Hanush is finding it difficult to imagine what the future holds.
I thought I could anticipate, but I'm kind of at a bit of a loss now. So I think sort of in a new paradigm of the way consumers will buy, the way consumers will dine. I don't think the landscape of dining will be the same again.
That's Melbourne wine bar owner Tanya Hanush ending that report from the ABC's Gavin Coote. President Trump says he's going to put pressure on governors to open up schools in the autumn despite a surge in cases. At least 32 states are reporting higher rates of new cases this week compared to last week. The US has just recorded a new record daily case count of 55,000 new infections. But the president says it's important for the country that schools reopen.
It's time to be open. It's time to stay open, and we will put out the fires as they come up, but we have to open our schools. It's so important to open our schools. And what you said from a psychological standpoint with respect to staying home any longer, you can't do it. You can't do it. That has great dangers also. So that's where we are. We're not closing. We'll never close. You'll have certain areas that will have difficulty, and they'll do what they have to do, and that'll be up largely to the governors.
And the president has formally moved to withdraw the US from the World Health Organization. Donald Trump made his intentions clear in late May, accusing the WHO of being under China's control in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Despite calls from the EU and others, he said he will pull out of the UN agency and redirect funds elsewhere. He has now notified the UN and Congress of his intentions, although the process could take at least a year. Joe Biden says if he wins the presidency in November, he will rejoin the WHO on his first day in office. The hugely popular video sharing app TikTok says it will make its service unavailable in Hong Kong in reaction to the new security law introduced by China. TikTok follows Google, Twitter and Facebook, which have all paused requests for user information from the Hong Kong government. Deutsche Welle's Stephen Beardsley has more.
The new security law raises questions over common business concerns like the safety of intellectual property and data security, and it lengthens the reach of the Chinese authorities.
I think if you are a business in Hong Kong, or you're an individual, or even if you're thinking of going to Hong Kong for a job, the advice I'm giving to people is think of Hong Kong as a transitory sort of place. I would not be holding a lot of intellectual property in Hong Kong. I certainly wouldn't hold any data in Hong Kong. I wouldn't have any excess cash in Hong Kong. I would simply be much more cautious about it. And I would treat it very much as I would treat a Chinese city.
Hong Kong's calling card was that it wasn't just another Chinese city. It offered legal certainty and access to Western finance that the mainland lacked. China believes it can preserve Hong Kong as a financial hub, though. It's poured capital into the island and mobilised allies among the business elite, many of whom have deep stakes in the mainland. On Monday, it even drove markets. Hong Kong's stock exchange closed at a 4-month high when a Chinese state-run newspaper encouraged bull market investment. Beijing's message: it can engineer the stability that business wants under the conditions that China wants.
Deutsche Welle's Stephen Beardsley with that report. The UK is set to resume arms sales to Saudi Arabia despite claims that the weapons will be used against civilians in Yemen in violation of international humanitarian law. Sales were halted in June last year after a legal challenge by campaigners who successfully argued in court that there'd been repeated violations by the Saudi-led coalition since 2015. But the UK government says it viewed these as isolated incidents. The BBC's Lise Doucette has more on the reaction.
A wave of criticism, not just from human rights groups, but also from political parties in the United Kingdom, because this decision comes not long after they backed a United Nations Security Council call for a global ceasefire, and just a day after they came out with a new approach, which was widely hailed, Global Britain for Good, in which they talked about a new sanctions regime, and some 20 members from Saudi Arabia were sanctioned for being connected to the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And from not just human rights groups, but people, organizations who have consistently been tracking the arms sales, especially the ones which could be used in the war in Yemen, the campaign against the arms trade, condemned it and said that there is a consistent pattern of breaches of international humanitarian law with the bombings of markets and schools and funerals.
Lise Doucette there. A rare copy of the world's first illustrated comic, which was about political and social life in Scotland in the 1820s, is due to go under the hammer. William Heath's Glasgow Looking Glass is said to have coined the phrase "to be continued," and only a handful of copies have survived. The black and white engravings have not been hand-tinted, meaning the comic is in original condition. It's predicted to fetch between $3,000 and $5,000 at the sale in Carlisle tonight. And that's World Watch for today. Back to you, Marnie.
Thanks, Annabelle. And that's Midday Report, Te Purongo o Te Poututanga for Monday, July the 8th. RNZ will bring you any developments on the story involving National MP Hamish Walker throughout the afternoon. But for now, we'll be back tomorrow from the Midday team. Kia pai tō koutou rā. Hei kona.
RNZ News at 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The disgraced Clutha Southland MP Hamish Walker won't be contesting the seat at the September election. The first-term National backbencher admitted yesterday that he leaked the private details of people with COVID-19 to the media. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
The National Party board has been meeting to discuss Mr Walker's future, but rather than wait for their decision, he announced he won't seek re-election. He has thanked the people of Clutha Southland and apologised for leaking the information. The party's leader, Todd Muller, who had asked the board to expel Mr Walker, has accepted his decision. He says there has been a clear breach of trust and the board will today discuss the selection of a new candidate. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
Nationals President Peter Goodfellow says the selection process in Clutha Southland will begin almost immediately. On behalf of the party's board, Mr Goodfellow has apologised for any distress caused to the individuals concerned by Mr Walker's action. A privacy lawyer says the COVID-19 patients whose details were leaked could lay a complaint with the Privacy Commissioner and seek compensation. Media to whom the material was leaked, including RNZ, chose not to publish any of it. But Catherine Delzell says it doesn't matter if names were released publicly or not.
There has been a data breach. An agency has released information that it does not appear that they were entitled to release. And then the next step is, have they experienced significant anxiety? And even the fact their names aren't out there, but the fact that they're worried about it and are suffering significant anxiety and significant loss of dignity would be enough to satisfy the test.
Privacy lawyer Catherine Delzell. The government is pumping millions of dollars into upgrading water systems throughout the country, but councils will have to sign up to wider reforms to get the cash. The $761 million package has been unveiled in Havelock North today at a water bore that was the source of a fatal Campylobacter outbreak in 2016. The Prime Minister says at least 34,000 people became ill or become ill each year from drinking tap water.
Everyone in New Zealand agrees that that is unacceptable in a developed nation like ours for us to have drinking water at that standard. And so that is why we have all been so determined to change that. Jacinda
Ardern says the government will work with councils to meet the huge costs involved in bringing systems up to scratch. A new drinking water regulator, Taumata Orawai, will enforce standards. The Reserve Bank is weighing up whether or not to extend...
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. There is one new case of COVID-19 to report in managed isolation in New Zealand today. The person who is tested positive for COVID-19 is a man in his 30s. He arrived in New Zealand on the 3rd of July from New Delhi, India. There was an incident last night where the man left his managed isolation facility, the Stamford Plaza, and went to a Countdown supermarket on Auckland's Victoria Street West. The Auckland Public Health Service has conducted a thorough interview with the person, as well as viewed CCTV footage from the facility, the CBD and Countdown to understand the risk to the public posed by this incident. While investigations are ongoing, the current assessment of the risk is low. The person did not come into close or casual contact, that is 2 metres or more, with anyone else during the time they were away from this facility, which was between 7 and 8 o'clock last night, that we have been able to identify. During the time that they were away from the facility, the person wore a mask, although indicated that that was removed for short periods of time. The person visited the Countdown supermarket in the time they were away from the facility, including visiting a small number of aisles and using a self-checkout. The Countdown remained closed today to do a thorough clean. Although the risk assessment for staff at the Countdown has been assessed as low, those staff will be provided with health information and COVID-19 tests. Auckland Public Health is continuing to work with the Countdown on their response. I understand the level of anxiety that this causes to all of our team of 5 million, particularly those that may have been in that area at the time. A reminder that our first line of defence against COVID-19 is basic hygiene measures. A reminder that our key public health measures, which remain important in protecting yourselves and each other from the spread of the disease, include washing your hands thoroughly, coughing and sneezing into your elbow, not touching your face, and not going to work, to socialise or to be out in public if you are unwell. If anyone is concerned about their health, they should call Healthline or their GP in the first instance to discuss what your individual course of action is, including whether getting tested would be a good idea. All COVID-19 testing facilities are also on standby to test people as required. People that need a test will have no barriers to getting it. The matter has been followed up by the all-of-government team managing the isolation and quarantine facilities, led by Air Commodore Darren Webb, who is also here today and will make a brief statement at the end and then was also available to answer questions. Whilst we're reviewing all of our systems, I want to be clear that the obligations and responsibilities on individuals in these facilities is to follow the rules which will keep our team of 5 million safe. There are fences and security arrangements in place at these facilities, but we also rely on those New Zealanders returning home to play by the rules. It is completely unacceptable that we have now had 2 people let everybody else down by breaking the rules, leaving facilities and putting New Zealanders at risk. These are acts of selfishness that we intend to use the full weight of the law to stop. Nevertheless, we are now immediately reviewing security arrangements and also smoking arrangements, and Minister Woods and Air Commodore Webb will have more updates on that tomorrow. So this brings our total number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 to 1,187, which is the number the Ministry of Health reports to the World Health Organisation. That brings the number of confirmed active cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand to 23. All are in managed isolation or quarantine. Yesterday, our labs completed 2,131 COVID-19 tests, and that brings the total number of tests completed to date to 419,055. I'll now ask Air Commodore Webb to make a brief comment, and then we'll both be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Minister. As I've mentioned previously, we have commissioned a review of activities in managed isolation and quarantine facilities, and part of that review looks at our systems and our resources. Once again, as the Minister has also pointed out, we'll be reviewing both of those things, considering our resourcing arrangements, security system arrangements, as well as our particular smoking policy to determine their status, and we will speak more about that tomorrow. Thank you.
Right, happy to take your questions.
Did the man know that he had tested positive for COVID when he left the facility?
No, this happened last night and the test result came in this morning.
Why was he able to leave?
My understanding is he left through a smoking area where the fences were being replaced, and it was only a matter of minutes before it was identified that he had left, and people went looking for him but were unable to locate him.
And was he unsure of the rules, or did he deliberately break the rules?
Everybody who goes into these facilities is abundantly clear, it's made abundantly clear to them what the rules were. But again, I'll ask Air Commodore Webb to comment on that.
Perhaps I'll just at the start, he wasn't allowed to leave. When our guests or returnees arrive in these facilities, they are given a written arrival letter and a verbal briefing on what the obligations are of them. Over the last 3 weeks, I've made it really clear on my expectations that individual accountability absolutely sits at the cornerstone of success in this area. We've had nearly 30,000 people through these facilities with 2 recent abscondees, and so we are looking at an increasing challenge about these people coming back to New Zealand. On any given day, we almost have 6,000 people in managed isolation facilities.
Why are you leaving it up to personal responsibility or individual responsibility when the stakes are this high?
Managed isolation facilities have a range of wraparound support to them. It starts with individual responsibilities. These aren't prisons. These are facilities which have been determined to be the best option for us to keep New Zealand safe. But fundamentally, they are hotels. They are supported with health workers, all of government support staff. We have upwards of 400 New Zealand Defence Force personnel supporting this on a 24/7 shift system. So there's a really robust system in place to make sure that the techniques that we need to employ to make this work are working. However, as we've seen, we can always continue to do better. But fundamentally, these aren't prisons or corrections facilities. And as people return to New Zealand, they need to understand that the obligations are on them not to break the law. There will be consequences. And I can confirm that this individual will be charged and there will be consequences to these actions.
What charges will he face?
So there's under Section 26 of the COVID Act, there will be a charge following the successful completion of that period of isolation. As was spoken about before, it's a 6-month imprisonment or $4,000 fine is the potential charge.
Kamara, obviously concerns about the Stanford Plaza have been raised for a while. Does this mean that the Stanford Plaza can never have been used as a managed isolation facility?
Stanford Plaza has a lot of good features as a managed isolation facility. We've gone through and ensured that the two minor things that we needed to ensure to assure those other residents have been put in place, and that is the case. They related to safety and health aspects around an air bridge and a fire escape system. But otherwise, it meets all the requirements that we have set and health have determined, and we are enacting to be a really successful facility.
A positive case is just able to wander out. What assurances can you give to permanent residents of that building that they're going to be safe?
Once again, they didn't wander out, so they knowingly snuck through what was in process of being replaced, a temporary fencing facility. So one of the system improvements that we identified early on in this week was to make those fences more robust, despite the fact that people should know that that's not okay to be jumping those fences. That is breaking the law. However, as a better physical barrier and ability to maintain the safety of those outside, we're replacing those fences.
Should you have replaced fences before you moved people?
Those fences were in place previously and were identified as a suitable mechanism. We have guards on there 24/7, so it was just a standardised improvement process.
You had a guard on there 24/7 and the guy still got out of there. How does that?
Well, he was being observed. There was contractual staff removing the fences and replacing them at the time, at night time. So once again, we will be considering the full policy considerations around the smoking area, and if it determined that the current practices are not suitable. But again, I come back to the point that this individual willfully and knowingly left an area where he should not have.
So sorry, was a security guard where he was, and
Yes.
the security guard did not stop him from leaving?
The security guard was there and observed the scenario with the fencing contractors moving the fences in place, and was not clear whether or not this was a contractor or indeed the person who was in there for a period of smoking.
What could the security guard have done? Even what powers does the security guards of these facilities actually have to stop people leaving?
Yeah, so they will rely on the support of the New Zealand Police to enforce the outcomes, and so there are processes in place where if something goes wrong and somebody breaks the law, they will immediately do what they can to prevent that individual leaving to the powers that they are assigned at the time, which they are clear upon. In this instance, they reported it through the central chain of command inside the operations centre, and then the police were immediately notified.
You've previously said that we've got through lockdown without guards outside every New Zealander's door, and you wouldn't expect the same at border facilities. But is that ever, with these two breaches, is that something that you would ever consider now moving to?
I think reviewing resourcing is one of those things that we always take a look at. It's not an inexhaustible supply, and we need to make sure that we're providing the best resource to the highest risk area that we know about. Smoking is one of those areas where we've discussed around the best approach to deal with the accepted need for people to return home and smoke. Having people observing those areas which are often out of the way and not in a public area, I think is a logical thing to do. But again, we have facilities and temporary fencing arrangements in place. It's clear that, and they are typically signposted, that that climbing over or finding a small gap in that facility and run off is not the sort of behaviour we'd be expecting.
Does that mean that you then need to put police into those areas 24/7 so that they have the power to apprehend anyone who does try to make an escape?
We're working with the police to just determine the best approach to their policing techniques, and we'll have more to say on that tomorrow.
Previous answer, could you just clarify what powers security guards have in that moment before calling other people into play? What powers they have in that moment to apprehend and detain or whatever?
They don't have the powers of policing to apprehend, but they have their private security qualifications, which will determine the extent of that. But clearly it's about communicating, and it's about then subsequently acting.
Extent of that, do they just watch as he disappears down the road and make a phone call?
No, if it's logical that they can take chase and they observe them, then that's exactly what they do.
Are they allowed to physically restrain someone from leaving?
No.
They're essentially watching someone and calling 111 like the rest of us.
And that's why it's a multifaceted approach. You're going to be observing them, you're going to be then calling in the appropriate support.
But the issue is an observation, the issue is detention, surely.
I think they both go together.
So why would you not put a police officer that has that power there?
Well, once again, as I said, the policing system of their techniques will be discussed in the next few days to determine whether the best approach is to have somebody on site all the time. I can tell you that the police have supported our facilities with an enhanced roving presence, and from their perspectives, that is the best approach to have the greatest flexibility. However, as I say, we will be determining whether an on-site physical presence might be a better approach.
Just not just broke out of the managed
and 10
isolation.
minutes. The Stanford Plaza is on Albert Street, which is just around the corner from the supermarket. So how did he spend, an hour at the supermarket? Did he visit anywhere else?
We are currently reviewing the CCTV footage just to ensure exactly what their movements were. But I think, as the Minister mentioned, there is good awareness for the vast majority, and we'll be just following that up once we have those details.
Can't rule out that he walked into another shop or interacted with other people in his hour and 10 minutes outside of the facility.
Once we have that footage confirmed, I'm sure there'll be more to be said on that.
I
Can you just clarify that so a security guard saw him leaving in the fencing area, thought, hang on, I think it's a fencing contractor, and let him walk off?
Yeah, so again, I haven't been into the smoking mirror myself, but it was at night time, and that individual was obviously mistaken about whether or not they thought it was a contractor. Quite quickly they had a conversation with the aviation security staff on site, and then responded in the next 1 or 2 minutes, and set about to locate that person.
Site to let people into that smoking area while the fencing was being repurposed, while it was being redone?
We'll take a look at our smoking procedures, but again, we had physical presence on site, and as in accordance with the procedures of the time, that was determined to be a suitable approach.
Is it a police resourcing issue that is preventing you from keeping police officers guard, or are there other issues that are preventing you from using police?
We'll be working with the police just to determine where best to apply their scarce resources as well. So we'll have more to say on that one tomorrow.
What currently is preventing you from getting police there?
Oh, we'll be talking with the police today further to again, as I said, determine whether or not the best approach for them is to have a physical presence on site, or to have a roving presence and then be able to respond quickly.
Did he so urgently leave from the supermarket?
Why can't you have them there at the moment? What's stopping you from putting police there at the moment?
No, there's nothing to stop us putting a police presence on site. It's that relationship and engagement with police to best determine which approach is the most effective.
Is it the most appropriate and effective approach stopping people from leaving managed isolation facilities?
Yes, and we have a system in place already. As I say, we have the Defence Force, we have the aviation security, private security staff and hotel staff. That has been proven to be effective for the vast majority of cases. We've had nearly 30,000 people through these facilities. The police can't necessarily respond to the full spectrum of their tasks, and so we'll just be working closely with them to determine if it's best to have somebody on site or if we continue with the current process.
We police told you they don't have the resource.
That's not what I've said.
Do we know if this chap was planning to come back, or if he was planning to abscond? Do we know what his plans were?
Well, the information that we have in the follow-up certainly looks like it was a spur-of-the-moment idea. He didn't look like he had been prepared to leave, and so once again, these are individuals who are faced with an opportunity and unfortunately made the wrong decision. This is, as I've said, this is illegal, against the law. It was made clear to them that that was not acceptable, and they still chose to do it.
Time.
To assure the
What did he so
residents?
urgently need from the supermarket?
I don't have those details, I'm sorry.
What can you say to assure the permanent residents of the Stanford Plaza that they're safe from catching COVID-19?
We've been communicating with the Body Corp and the residents and the hotel staff to really make sure that they are comfortable. We are absolutely assured that there is no connections between the Stanford Residence Tower and the managed isolation facilities.
But they weren't comfortable before, so surely they're going to be even less comfortable now.
Well, I will say the mitigation measures that we've put in place for this are satisfactory and will ensure that there's no risk to those residents for COVID-19.
The language barrier issue. Are there people to interpret different rules for all the different ethnicities that might be coming in? I know they're New Zealanders, but some people might not have English as a first language.
No, it's a good question, and we do have language support, and we are, again, part of that process of review will be to determine whether or not we need to increase the numbers of different languages used in written documents and whether or not there's more staff needed. We do have language support staff on site, and we'll just continue to make those improvements as we go forward.
Might have been a misunderstanding, might not have been clear enough.
I don't have any evidence to suggest it wasn't clear.
Defence personnel have any powers to stop people from leaving? Are they there on site all the time, just to clarify?
So the Defence are not using any Section 9 Defence Act powers. They are, again, operating under auspice of an all-of-government support team, and they are reliant on the New Zealand Police to conduct those enforcement.
And is there special legislation enforced at the minute that would allow police or defence to give them powers to stop people from leaving?
Sorry, say that again?
Do they need special powers to stop people from leaving, or is there something already in place?
They would do if that was a choice taken. Currently, that's not the intention.
Long term, we're now looking at a couple of cases like this, both from hotels in the most densely populated part of our entire country. In the long term, do you think it's worthwhile reconsidering the merits of having highly contagious people quarantined in the middle of our biggest city?
I mean, quarantine is a complex undertaking, there's no doubt about it. And as I've said before, it requires 3 interlinked areas. 1 is a suitable location, 2 is a suitable health system, and then 3 is that wraparound support staff. And quite simply, those facilities aren't available out in the countryside. So regardless, the current regime requires us to use hotels, and they are located largely in the central business districts. Where we can find them in different locations and they meet all that criteria, then we certainly look to do so.
How confident are you other people weren't sneaking out from that same gap in the fence and going to the supermarket and coming back?
We took immediate measures to make sure that gap was closed, and
while that gap was there before you discovered that this man had left, how confident are you that others hadn't left?
Well, the good thing about the Stamford Plaza is it's got a very sophisticated CCTV system, and so we've been able to monitor that and confirm that did not happen.
Is that you're installing 6-foot high fences at all of the managed isolation facilities? Was that what this fence was being? Was that already underway before this happened, or is this?
No, that was what was being underway at the time.
Why wasn't he tested until today?
The last couple of questions for Air Commodore.
Why wasn't he tested until today if he arrived on the 3rd?
Yeah, so that he arrived very late on the 3rd, and so the standard approach for the testing is on or around the day 3, day 4. That's not uncommon. So he was tested in accordance with the normal early in that first week period.
On day 3?
No, it's on or around day 3.
For the people that may have been in that countdown?
Well, I would say, as the Minister has already said, Healthline is the absolutely logical place to go to if they have any concerns about their own personal safety. They'll be getting good advice. Personal hygiene standards are first and foremost to make sure we all stay healthy.
Could it be self-isolation?
Again, I would say that's a health question. Perhaps the Minister would like to.
Look, that is something that people should discuss with Healthline. The advice that we've had from health officials is the risk is very low. The person, whilst they tested positive, is asymptomatic.
We understood that the testing was supposed to be happening on day 3, and now someone who might have been stopped from leaving because he has COVID has left. So should that testing be happening on day 3?
Look, let's be very clear. This person did not have any authorisation to leave whatsoever. He broke the law in leaving the facility. The testing happens around day 3, and it then happens again around day 12, and there are clear protocols in place around that. Obviously, people's time of arrival and potential time of departure and so on will have an impact on that. But the test had been done when the person left the facility without any authorisation to leave the facility. And it was literally a case of waiting overnight for the result to come in, which it did this morning.
When did around day 3 or around day 12?
That's always been the protocol. It's always been the protocol, on or around day 3 and on or around day 12.
Testing happening if it's now moved to on or around? I mean, that's quite vague.
Yeah, no, look, the testing is happening exactly as we expect. The number of tests, and I get these daily, a breakdown of the number of, I went through all this yesterday, but the number of tests that I get on a daily basis and the breakdown of that suggests that an appropriate number of people are being tested each day in managed isolation and quarantine facilities to meet that requirement around day 3 and around day 12.
What qualifies as around? Is that a couple of days around or 3 days later is around?
No, I think it would be within a 24-hour period.
People still expected to be tested twice in their stay, or
yes.
is it now?
No, the rules have not changed here. They're still expected to be tested twice.
Still have to stay for a 48-hour period after they received that on or around day 12 test.
It would depend on exactly the time that they got the test, but of course they would have to have a negative test before they were allowed to leave, and they would have to complete their 14 days.
Have you received that information back from officials about why the overall testing rates have decreased a bit in the last few days?
I've had some preliminary feedback on that this morning. I'm having, as I indicated yesterday, I'm having a more detailed conversation with them about that tomorrow morning. I did want them to have some time to look at it very closely and to make any adjustments that they needed to make to their systems and processes so that we can have another in-depth look at that again tomorrow.
Wait to the idea.
Is this a failure? Like, I mean, is this a failure of the military precision that was expected of the system now?
Look, these are managed isolation facilities. They are not maximum security prisons. These people are coming back to New Zealand. Our team of 5 million is bending over backwards to provide them with a safe passage back into the country that keeps them safe and keeps other New Zealanders safe, and we expect them to follow the rules. This person broke the law.
Give weight to the idea that people should be confined to their rooms until they receive a negative test result?
Look, I think as both Air Commodore Webber and I have indicated, rules around things like going out for cigarettes are being reviewed. And Dr Woods and Air Commodore Webber will be looking at that overnight, and they'll talk about that more tomorrow.
You can't really ban people from going out and smoking, can you?
Look, again, I'll leave that till tomorrow. There'll be conversations about that tomorrow.
So many resources at this, hundreds of millions of dollars, multiple reviews. You've now had several different ministers looking at it, including one essential resignation over it. Are you worried that there's nothing you can do that seems to be bringing this issue under control? No, I would push back on you against that assertion. This person broke the law. They did so deliberately and willfully. That is not acceptable. They are letting down the whole team of 5 million when they do that, and we have zero tolerance for that. There are legal avenues available to the government, and I would expect that those legal avenues will be fully pursued.
There's no failure of process here, just like the other woman who jumped the fence. Do you expect processes to change?
Look, again, we can always look at processes, but again, I want to be really clear here. We as a country are working incredibly hard to provide New Zealanders who have a right to return home with a pathway to return home in a way that is safe for them and is safe for other New Zealanders. And the only thing we are asking them in return is that they follow the rules. This person did not follow the rules, and that is not acceptable.
Can I ask for your reaction on Hamish Walker deciding not to stand at the election?
Look, that's a matter for Hamish Walker and for the National Party.
Standing given what he did?
Again, that's a matter for Hamish Walker and for the National Party.
On the 70 minutes that this man was away for, is he cooperating fully in terms of filling out that time frame in as much detail as he can?
My understanding is that there have been 2 interviews with him so far, and that those discussions are ongoing, but that he has been cooperating in those interviews.
A greater clarity on how the information that was in the hands of the trust has become widespread, because the trust says, the helicopter trust, Auckland Helicopter Trust says there was no privacy breach within their walls, yet their acting CEO says she received the information in her capacity.
That's one of the reasons why the investigation is obviously going to be continuing. We do want to get to the bottom of exactly what happened here, and I don't think the government should rely on what comments people make to the media to draw a line under it. We actually want to have a proper, thorough investigation so that all of the facts can be put on the table, so that everyone can be clear what happened. And that investigation will continue, and it will continue, as I indicated last night, independently. I've not spoken to the investigation, and I don't intend to.
Can you provide some clarity on what agencies and organisations had that list of COVID-19 patients and why they needed it?
Look, again, that is something that the investigation will be looking at very closely. So I'm not going to speculate on how that information may have come to be released, or how it might have come to be given to the people who did release it. That's something that the investigation will look at, and that will look at whether the distribution list for that information was appropriate.
Have you asked for how many people were on that distribution list?
No, I haven't received feedback from the Privacy Commission, although I have seen the public comments that he has made.
People were on the distribution list. How many people had access to that information?
Again, that is something that the investigation will be looking at. Now, I've been very clear. I've been very clear that I want that investigation to be completed as soon as possible, and I'm not going to conduct a parallel investigation to that.
If there's a decision made to press charges, can you outline how that decision gets made? Will it be made on the recommendation of the report? Will it go to Cabinet? Will it be the State Services Commission that presses those charges? Well, how does that
Again, I'm not going to preempt the report.
It's not the report. That's if charges are laid or pressed. Who makes that decision?
Well, it would depend on the findings of the report. So I think, at this point, we've just got to wait and see what the report actually says.
Can you say yes or no whether the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust should have had that information?
Look, that is one of the things that the investigation will look at. They'll be looking very closely at who had the information and why they had the information. But I do want to be clear here, the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust is an integral part of our health system. So whether they, regardless of the particular circumstances of this case, they will have information that is confidential, and New Zealanders have an absolute right to expect that that trust will behave as we expect all of the health system to behave, and treat the people's private and confidential information with the utmost confidence and not release it for any purpose other than what it is there for.
Say, as Health Minister, whether you think they should have had it or not?
Again, there's a thorough investigation going on here. It's being done independently, and I'm not going to preempt the outcomes of that.
I just wanted to ask around the quarantine, breaking the rules in quarantine. You said the government have legal avenues to go down and you will pursue them. Are you, just to clarify, are you just talking about that fine is 6 months prison, or are there any other options on the table for you?
Look, again, I, as a minister, I'm not going to direct whether or not someone should be prosecuted, but there is certainly the ability for that to happen, and our expectation is that there'll be, the government's expectation is that there'll be a zero tolerance approach to this kind of behaviour.
Do you think National should be footing the bill for, or Hamish Walker and Michelle Bogue should be footing the bill for the State Services Inquiry?
Oh, look, I think their behaviour was unethical. I think it was unacceptable, but I still think that we as a government have a responsibility to get to the bottom of all of the facts around this particular release of information, including who had the information, why they had the information, whether anybody had the information that shouldn't have had the information, and I, think that it's important that that investigation runs its course.
Have you received any updates from the State Services Commission in terms of how the events of the last 2 days affect the timeline and progress of Mr Heron's inquiries?
No, I haven't.
Generous, 0.2% of the population uses the COVID Tracer app daily. Is that good enough?
No, and I can give you the latest numbers if you like. So the app's now got 591,000 registered users. We'd obviously like to see that continue to increase. There are 77,224 posters that have been created and positioned around the country. They have been scanned to date 1,367,121 times. Those numbers are low, and we do want to lift our game here. That's going to require, again, the team of 5 million to all play their part in making sure that they are using those posters. The posters are now widely distributed, so any blockage that was preventing people from putting up the QR codes for their premises, they have been removed. So people now have those posters most places where they need to be, and we'll obviously continue to identify gaps and look to plug those. But actually, the bit that's missing is that people aren't scanning them and they're not downloading the app. So we want everybody to play their part, download the app and scan the codes.
Besides saying that in these stand-ups, is the government taking any other action to encourage further uptake of the app?
Look, one of the things that I'll be doing tomorrow is I'll be meeting with the team who have oversight of contact tracing, and they of course have been monitoring the implementation of the recommendations from the Viral Review. So I've got some time tomorrow afternoon to sit down with them and work through in detail what they've been doing around that. And if they have further recommendations on further action they think the government should take to support the system to work as it's intended, then of course I'll be taking that on board and I'll follow that up.
More funding into it?
I wouldn't rule it out, but at this point, my message to New Zealanders is you all have the ability to play a bigger role here, to use the app. The app is there, it's free, it's not difficult to download, it's not difficult to use. Please do.
Do you have an apology for the team of 5 million for letting someone with COVID out into the community?
Look, as I said, this person deliberately and willfully broke the law. I think the person who should be doing the apologising is them.
Into the official quarantine.
Yes, they are now in quarantine.
People might be feeling quite anxious about this. It's a lot of people's worst fears. What would you say to them?
Look, as I said, the advice that I've had from public health officials is that the public health risk is very low. There is no evidence at this point that the person has come into contact with other people whilst they were out on their walk. and also they were asymptomatic. So again, the combination of those factors creates a very low risk profile. But what it does highlight is that we always need to look very closely at how the system is operating and where it can continue to be improved. I think you've already seen evidence that that is happening on an ongoing basis, and that will continue to happen.
How many of the 70 minutes was he inside the supermarket?
I don't have an exact time for that. It could be up to about 20 minutes, but obviously that all of that timeline, minute by minute, is currently being pieced together using CCTV footage and also in-depth interviews with the gentleman concerned. A couple more questions, yeah.
He just returned of his own volition.
My understanding is that he came back, yes.
So police didn't apprehend him, he just wandered back into the gas?
They went looking for him, and I think he came back before he was located.
They didn't actually find him?
That's my understanding, but again, a minute-by-minute timetable of what happened and when and who was involved is currently being put together.
You're pretty lucky he came back, aren't you?
Look, I think he should not have left the facility in the first place. He broke the law in doing so. I don't think that you should say that because somebody broke the law that somehow the people who are involved in managing these facilities are unlucky. Actually, every day, New Zealanders, 5 million of us, could break the law in any number of different ways, and we don't because we're law-abiding citizens. Actually, we expect people who are in these facilities to follow the law.
Through a sheer stroke of luck that this guy turned up back at the facilities, your people couldn't find him.
Look, again, he broke the law.
Personal responsibility, because some people, as has been reported, might be suffering mental health issues, things that mean they don't quite understand the rules or issues like that. So can everyone really be held fully accountable?
Well, look, I think our team of 5 million held themselves accountable for staying home and following the rules and did that very, very well. All right, thanks very much, everybody.